Hi again, everybody. So happy to be here on Erev Pesach learning about matzah. And because this has been on my mind, it has really elevated my whole Erev Pesach. And I am excited to share that with you because I know that I trust that with Hashem's help, it will elevate your Erev Pesach and make your Pesach much more meaningful. Towards the end of the Second World War, the Shterna Rebbe was in the DP camp in the Russian-governed town of Chernovitz. And it was 2 weeks or 3 weeks before Pesach, and the Shterna Rebbe really, really wanted shmura matzah. And with Hashem's help and with tremendous hardship and mesiras nefesh, he managed to bake a very limited supply of shmura matzah. And he let it be known to different rabbanim in the area that he would be sharing these matzahs with every rebbe or every rav. He would give exactly three matzahs, and that's what he did. He was giving out those matzahs, each person only three matzahs. The son of the Vizhnitzer Rebbe, Moshe Hager, came knocking on the Vizhnitzer Rebbe. The Shterna Rebbe's door didn't have doors or whatever, however, the privacy that they limited space that they had in that situation, in that setting. And he took his three matzahs and then he paused and he looked at him and said, my father really insists that he needs 6 matzahs. And the Shterna Rebbe, having so much respect for the Vizhnitzer Rebbe, didn't ask too many questions. He said, okay, if that's what your father says, then that's what I will do. And he gave him the 6 matzahs, even though he gave everybody only 3. Erev Pesach, after B'dikas Chametz, Reb Moshe Hager comes again to visit the Shterna Rebbe, and this time he's holding a package, and he hands it to the Shterna Rebbe, and he says, my father says to give this to you. The Shterna Rebbe opens it, and inside are 3 matzahs. And he looks at him and he says, I don't understand. Didn't your father say that he needed 6 matzahs? Why are you giving me now 3 matzahs? Why are you returning these 3 matzahs? And Reb Moshe said, my father said to ask you if you saved any of the matzahs for yourself. Did you? And the Shterna Rebbe, like his face turned red for a minute, and he said, no, I didn't. But how could I? So many other people needed the matzahs. And the Moshe turned to him and said, so my father thought that that's exactly what you would do. And that's why he wanted the 3 extra matzahs, so that I could come here now and give them to you, and so that you could have matzahs for Pesach. And of course, this story is about the tremendous, tremendous Avos Yisrael and mesiras nefesh, thoughtfulness and caring that binds Klal Yisrael together and that has kept us going through the generations. It's also about the value of matzah. And there are countless stories about how many Yidden had mesiras nefesh, tremendous hardship, went to such great extent just to be able to eat a little piece of matzah. And the miracle stories that we have of Rabbeim giving a little bit of matzah to somebody, and the refuah that it brought, and the miracles that resulted from those little pieces of matzah. So for generations, this has been the bread known as the bread of faith and the bread of healing, michla de mehemenusa, in the words of the Zohar, the bread of faith, and michla de asvasa, bread of healing. And what really is the secret of the matzah? What is in it? What is in it beyond the flour and water? What is so special? What makes matzah so special that gives it this tremendous spiritual quality, that makes it the center point, the focal point of the whole Yom Tov of Pesach, and really of the whole Jewish calendar? What is it? And we're going to discuss this topic based on the text of the Alter Rebbe, the Baal HaTanya, on this topic. But first, before we dive into the text, I want to just broaden the lens just a bit and make a connection between, because this is the time of the Tanya, that we always learn Tanya at this time, I want to connect it to all that we've been learning up until now. Pesach is the time, it's Zman Cherusenu, it's the season of freedom. It's the time when we celebrate our freedom from Mitraim. What is freedom? Sometimes we think about freedom, the first thing that used to come to my mind is the freedom to do whatever I want, the freedom to have whatever I want. but my desires are really only one layer of who I am. It's not my truest self. And if I act on all my desires, I will be nothing but a slave to my desires. I'll be limited to my desires, which would be a very limited part of who I am. We are so much more than our desires. We're so much more than the things we have and even the things that we want to have. And acting on all our desires would make us a different kind of slaves. And maybe I wouldn't be a slave to Parai, but I would be a slave to society. I would be a slave to my compulsions, to my addictions, to my limitations, to my weaknesses, to my impulsivity, right? So being free is not about having all that we want or doing all that we want. And it's also not about having all the power in the world, because money might mean the freedom to buy things that we want, but things don't give us freedom. Things don't set us free of misery. We all know people throughout history and even in today's world, and we all know from our own experience as well, that our misery is bigger than our things that we have. And sometimes, I could relate to the very, very crushing, limiting feeling of not having the money to buy what we need. And that is very crushing, and it feels very confining. And yet the other extreme is also not what sets us free. A person could have all the money in the universe and all the things that money could buy and still be stuck in a very, very, very deep, dark place, stuck without love, without connection, without happiness, without healthy relationships, stuck with anxiety, with self-pity, with resentment. So what is true freedom? What is true freedom? It's not money. It's not having all that we want. It's not having all the things in the world. What is freedom? And freedom, according to Torah, is the expression of our deepest selves. Freedom is that finding that core self and allowing it to soar, giving it wings to express itself unlimitedly. And it's the unleashing of our neshama. That's freedom. Freedom is the unleashing, the unfettering of our soul, which is the actual part of Hashem within us. And when we can know our essential self, when we know our neshama, we can live from the place of that beautiful, glorious, majestic, wholesome place inside of us, and we let that shine forth in all its glory. When we can do that, when we can let ourselves, that part of ourselves, be bigger, when we can let that part of ourselves matter more than our desires, matter more than our compulsions, than our habits, than our past, than our childhood, than our parents, than our trauma, than anything or anything else about us, more than our successes, more than our failures, more than our accomplishments, more than our rejections or our everything, more than anything else really about us or about our experiences. When we can do that, that is freedom. And how do we do that? It's by valuing Hashem more than everything. I was speaking recently for a group of women in Williamsburg. It was a very special experience. And a woman shared that her mother was, or I'm not sure if it was her mother or her grandmother, who was a Holocaust survivor. And her sister, her older sister, at one point were running away from the Nazis, Yimach Shemam, may their memories be erased. And she was with her older sister, and they found themselves in the forest at night. And her older sister was encouraging her to climb up onto the tree where they would be a little bit more elevated and possibly a little bit more safe. Climb up onto the tree. Let's go. We're going to be a little bit in the tree. And the younger sister said, Aber Chab Meira, I'm afraid to climb up in the tree. And her sister said, don't worry, my dear sister, and don't be afraid. Hashem is bigger than the tree and bigger than the dark night. And she said those words carried her through the war, that Hashem is bigger than the tree and bigger than the darkest night. Those words carried her through. And she said it still gives her strength It gave her mother strength, and it gives her daughter strength. This is how she lives. That Hashem is bigger than the tree and bigger than the darkest night. Because when we have the sense of value that Hashem is bigger than anything else, that our neshama is bigger than anything else about us, that's true freedom. And only Hashem can give us that true freedom. Because if we have something that's bigger than anything else, and we live with that something, we live with Hashem, and we hold on to Hashem, and we let Hashem carry us through life, we're free. We're not tied down to anything because we have something bigger than all of that. And that's an inner freedom as well, because when our neshama matters more than anything else about us, then we can always, no matter what, even as we give credence and we validate our emotions, it's not who we are. It's never who we are. We are always bigger than any one detail, or even than the sum total of everything else about ourselves. So we've been learning Tanya for a while, Baruch Hashem, together, and we've been talking about this sense of freedom, but we used a different word. And I want to just connect the word that we used. We used the word bittul. Bittul is the sense of awareness that we are here in this world by Hashem, with Hashem, for Hashem, right? Bittul is the truth of who we are. It's the deepest truth of who we are. We are carriers of Hashem's light. That's who we are, okay? And when we're not aware that we're carriers of Hashem's light, when we don't have that sense of bittul, or when our sense of bittul is somewhat weak, we're subconsciously driven to create an identity for ourselves. When we don't have bittul, we're looking for an identity. When we don't have the truth, we're looking for something to replace that truth. When we don't have that wholesome identity that I am here in this world by Hashem, with Hashem, for Hashem, we're on the lookout for a different identity. And that identity is called ego. In the Baal HaTanya's words, the opposite of bittul is when we see ourselves as davar nifrad bifnei atzmai, separate and on our own, separate, alone, self-sufficient, independent, by myself, with myself, for myself. That's the opposite of bittul, and that's ego. The more awareness of our true identity we have, the less we have to create that identity for ourselves. The more bittul we have, the less ego. Less bittul means more ego, right? It's like a seesaw or a pendulum. And since freedom is the expression, right? We said that freedom is living with that truth. Freedom is having a truth that's bigger than ourselves and living by that truth. Freedom is Hashem. Freedom is bittul. So freedom and bittul are really the same thing. The more bittul we have, the more freedom we have in our lives, because nobody, like having anxiety and having traumatic experiences and having any unpleasantness in our lives, and I'm not here, chas v'shalom, to minimize any of that, but the healing comes when we realize that we ourselves are untouched by that, that there's a part of ourselves that's untouchable by any of that, and that's our neshama, and that is bigger, and it matters more, and we can heal ourselves by holding on to that truth, by holding on to the essential self. And that's freedom. Freedom is having that truth. So bittul and freedom are really the same thing, because the more ego we have, the more we are slaves to our everything, to our anxiety, to our weaknesses, to our compulsions, to our habits, to our past, to our trauma. Ego is the attachment to all of that. You know, sometimes people think of ego as arrogance, like I am big, I am better, but ego could also be expressed as a sense of worthlessness, a sense of lowliness, a sense of nothingness. I am nothing, a sense of even self-pity. How? Because the Baal HaTanya's description of ego is davar nifrad bifnei atzmai, something separate. Now, inflated doesn't mean arrogance. It's inflated because it's hot air. It's nothing. It's an illusionary version of who we are. It's a self-created, self-made identity. And that selfish identity, because I need to be everything, and I know that I am weak, so I might feel worthless. I might feel sorry for myself in that place of nothingness, but it's all under the same umbrella of davar nifrad b'fnei atzmai, something separate, someone separate, other than Hashem, on my own, by myself, with myself, for myself. And the more ego we have, the more enslaved we are to our anxiety, to our self-pity, to our misery, to our resentments, to our fears, to our traumatic experiences. And all of this we learned in Tanya. And I just wanted to make this connection here because it can deepen our experience of this Yom Tov. And now we're going to jump into the text. All right, we're going to do very little of the text inside. Now, this mimer is a very long mimer, and even with all the length of it, it's half. It's Chelik Aleph. If you see Sheshis Yamim Techel Matzos, this is a mimer, Divrei HaMaschil, meaning the opening words are Sheshis Yamim Techel Matzos. For 6 days, you will eat matzos. And it's part 1, Chelik Aleph. The Ches Aleph stands for Chelik Aleph, part 1. The second part covers or talks about Shvi'i Shel Pesach, the seventh day of Pesach and Kriyas Yam Suf. And the beginning of this mimer has questions. Paragraph 1 has questions that will only be answered in the second part. So we're going to skip that. And we're going to start from where you see that little arrow, second paragraph. Okay. We're going to start with a question about matzah. Okay. Gam lahavin. We want to understand Masha Kasav, what it says in the Haggadah, and it also says it, we read it in the Haggadah, but it says it in the Chumash, in Parshas Bay, Vayoifu es habatzek asher haitziu miMitraim. The Jewish people baked the matzah that they took out of Mitzrayim. Ugais matzahs, they were cakes of matzah. Ki loy chametz, it was not chametz, it didn't rise. Why didn't it rise? Ki gershu miMitraim, because they were chased out of Egypt, they were chased out of Mitzrayim. They could not wait for the dough to rise. Demashma, from these words, it sounds that with these words, we are giving a reason, an explanation to why the Jewish people ate matzah on that night and on that day. But this is a question. Why? Because demashma shezeu nesinas tam lemasha afu matzahs v'lo chametz. We're giving a reason why they baked matzah and they didn't eat chametz. And what's the reason? Because they were chased out of Mitzrayim and they didn't have enough time for the bread to become chametzik. And this is a great wonder. The Baal HaTanya is raising our curiosity about something here. What's the curiosity here? Remember, before Yetzias Mitzrayim, Bnei Yisrael were told, on the 10th day of Nisan, on the 10th day of Chodesh Nisan, the month of Nisan, they should take a sheep and attach it to their beds, right? And they're going to make a korban Pesach. They're going to they're going to slaughter that sheep and eat it, right? They're going to put the blood on their doorpost. They had a whole process of what they were going to do with that. And that night, before, like on the eve of the 15th day of the month of Nisan, they're going to sit down and eat matzah, and only eat matzah and the korban Pesach, and they will not eat chametz on that night. So it would seem that the reason why Bnei Yisrael, even the first Pesach, why did they eat matzah, was because they were commanded by Hashem to eat matzah. Why do we need a reason why they ate matzah? We know why they ate matzah. They ate matzah because Hashem told them to eat matzah. Okay, let's go back into the imkain. If they have the mitzvah, if Hashem told them, if Moshe Rabbeinu instructed them on this day, we're only going to eat matzah, right? They only had that mitzvah for the one day, but they had it for the full day. Why would we think that they would bake chametz if they were told to bake matzah? Then we have to come up with a whole creative reason that they were chased out of Mitzrayim and they needed, and that's why they ate matzah. So that's one question. The second question is, Gam lahavim, we also want to understand Masha Kasav b'Haggadah, what we say in what's written in our Haggadah. At a certain point in the Seder, there's the most important part of the part of Magid, the part that everybody says. We say, why do we have matzah? Why do we eat maror, right? Matzah zu sha'anu oichlem. We point to it and we say, this matzah that we are eating on this night, why do we eat it? Matzah zu, I'm back in the text. Matzah zu sha'anu oichlem al shumma. Why are we eating this matzah? Al shumma, why? Al shum, because shaloi hispik b'tzekes shalavasenu lahachmetz, because the bread of our forefathers did not have a chance to rise. Ad shenigla alehem melech malchei hamalachim hakadosh baruch hu u'ga'olam, because Hashem, the King of all kings, redeemed them on this night. That's also a question. Why are we pointing to that as a reason for why we eat matzah? They already had the mitzvah that night to eat the Karban Pesach together with matzah and maror. And this question becomes even stronger when we consider another fact, okay? When did Hashem reveal himself? Nigla alehem melech malchei hamlachim hakadosh baruch hu u'ga'olam. When did this great, awesome miracle happen that Hashem himself came into Egypt and performed that makkah, that makkah's b'chayres, killing every firstborn Egyptian and passing over, jumping over the homes of the Jewish people? When did that happen? At midnight or after midnight. And we are careful to eat the matzah before midnight, which was what they also had to do at that time, right? We eat it before midnight. It didn't even happen yet in the story. If we're remembering, if we're commemorating, we're sitting at our Seder on the evening of Tes Vav Nisan. It didn't happen yet. This idea of Nigla Aleha Melech Malchei Malachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu Ga'olam, this redemption, that glorious, awesome moment of redemption, it didn't happen yet. We're sitting before Chatzais in the evening. It's going to be 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night, whatever it is. And we're going to be eating matzah and we're pointing to it and we're saying, because Hashem redeemed us, but it didn't happen yet. And we have another thing that already did happen, which is we have a mitzvah, just like they had then. We had the mitzvah to eat matzah on this night. So why are we saying that? Now in paragraph 3, which I won't read inside, the Baal HaTanya points out that there are 2 different times when Hashem tells us to do matzah, to eat matzahs, and the spelling of the word is different. And this difference is not just a technical difference, it's a spiritual, qualitative difference, okay? When we were told on this night, eat matzahs, the word matzahs are spelled with mem, tzadik, saf, matzahs, without a vav. When we're told that we ate matzahs when we were going out of Mitraim because it didn't have time to bake, that time the word matzahs is spelled with a vav. And the Baal HaTanya says, this is not just a technical difference, it represents something. The letter vav, Kabbalistically, represents the drawing down of Hashem's light into this world. And why is it spelled that way after Chatzos, after midnight, after that glorious moment, the awesome moment of redemption, the beginning of the actual redemption? It's because at that moment, Hashem's light was so manifest, so revealed, so prevalent in this world. It was shining forth so brightly with so much glory that is represented in the Vav. Hashem's energy, that beautiful light of godliness, came into the world, descended into the world. Before Chatzos, the matzah is spelled without the Vav because that awesome light did not yet come into the world. After Chatzos, that awesome light came into the world, and that's hinted to in that Vav, that extra Vav that's in that word. And he's telling us something else. This matzah, when we're sitting down at the table, at our Seder table, and we point to the matzah and we eat the matzah, what we're eating, the spiritual quality of what we're eating is the matzah that's spelled with a vav. And that's why we reference the matzah that Bnei Yisrael ate, that the Jewish people ate when they were already out of Mitraim. After that great, awesome exposure of Hashem's light in the world, that matzah is what we eat tonight. Now, we don't yet know what this matzah is. Okay, so yay. So Hashem's light was revealed in this world. What does that have to do with the matzah? What difference does it make to my bread? The fact that Hashem's light is so exposed and so revealed in the world. What does it mean to my bread? And for that, we want to know, the Baal HaTanya goes into a very lengthy explanation, which I will do very briefly. Baal HaTanya says, okay, now we need to know, how does that great, awesome light influence and make a difference to the matzah that we're eating? For that, he says, let's take a little trip. He doesn't say let's take a little trip, but he takes us on a trip to understand a question that's curious. When we know that there's different levels of animation, different levels of energy through which Hashem animates the world. And there's 4 levels of creation. The first is domem, which is silent. That's stones and minerals. That level of that has very little godly energy. The godly energy in it is silent. It's not animated at all. And then you have taimeach, which is more vibrant. It's a vegetative group. It has more godly energy in it. And then you have chai, which has even more godly energy or stronger godly animation of the animal kingdom. And then you have medaber, which is humans. Okay. Now we are medaber. We are within medaber. We are the Jewish people. How could it be that we could get energy from someach, from something that has less spiritual energy, less godly animation? How could it possibly be that we could get energized from it? Where is that even possible? And the Baal HaTanya explains that within the order of the worlds, of how Hashem's light comes into the world, there is something that's higher than all of that. Now, our soul comes from the world of Beriah, which we discussed here at different occasions. Our neshama comes from the world of Beriah within Seder Hishtalshelus, within that natural order that Hashem designed through which his light comes into the world. But there's something that's even higher than all of that, and that's called Olam HaTohu, the world of chaos, which is unknowable. It's where Hashem's light is so intense and so strong that it's unknowable, it's indiscernible. You can't even, it's beyond knowing. It's indescribable, it's beyond measure. Now, within food and even within domain, within the silent world, within our lives, there are sparks of Olam HaTohu everywhere. And when a Jew eats a piece of bread and makes a blessing on that bread, what we are doing is we are elevating those sparks. And it's not the bread that's giving us energy. Technically, it's the nutrients in the bread, but what's powering, what's enabling, what's fueling that energy? It's the godliness in that bread. It's God's animation. It's that spark of holiness in there. And the reason why it's able to give us energy is because that comes from a place, those sparks come from a place that's even higher than our godly soul. It's unknowable, it's untouchable, and it's meaning it's higher than our intellectual powers even. It's higher than our soul. And for that reason, it has the capacity to nurture our soul, to give us not just physical energy, but spiritual energy, the energy to serve Hashem, the energy to know Hashem, the energy to meditate about Hashem, the energy to connect with Hashem. It's an unbelievable thing. And I know this is a very deep concept. For those of you who have learned this before, I hope it's clear enough. And for those of you who didn't, I don't want to get stuck on it. So I'm kind of glossing over it because I don't want to skip it entirely. because I feel like for those of you who have some familiarity with this, it's interesting. So based on this general awareness about how food in general could give us energy and animation, now we could appreciate where matzah comes into the picture and the unique quality of that matzah has. The bottom of page 2 is where the Baal HaTanya summarizes all of the above. So let's go to that. Bottom of page 2, the last line, they're underlined. How does food give us energy, sustenance, nutrients? What is the spiritual quality of that? Because within the food, there is enclosed some of the 248 sparks from the world of Taihu, which is higher than the world of Tikkun, which is the world we live in. Al-Kain, bi'chaylasam, that's why food has the capacity, lahaisif iloi, to give us an advantage, to give us energy, and to give us a quality, gam lebechinas chachma, umidas shabenefesh elikis, even to nourish our nefesh elikis, even to nourish our neshama. The Kriyas Shema, Utfila, Ve'esa, Katar Mitzvahs, while we're doing Kriyas Shema, while we're doing Torah and Mitzvahs. Why? Because essentially those sparks are higher than our neshama, therefore they can nurture our neshama. Okay, now page 3. Now we're coming to something really, really fascinating. Okay, based on all of this as an introduction, or the Baal HaTanya tells us that the Zohar teaches us that just like in the physical development of a child doesn't recognize, cannot say, when his father walks into his room, he might light up. But a child doesn't say, Tati, Tati, doesn't say that to his father until he tastes bread. That's what the Gemara tells us. And the Zohar explains that just like in the physical intellectual development of a child, I'm going to read this inside, line 2 of paragraph 1 on page 3. Just like intellectual development of a child, a child doesn't know or understand anything ad lechem, until he tastes bread. As explained before, so too, when the Jewish people left Mitraim, when Hashem took each of us out of Mitraim, just like a child doesn't know anything, intellectually, his intellectual development is not developed until it doesn't start getting to a place of real recognition until the child tastes bread. So too, we, the Jewish people, when we were going out of Mitzrayim, we did not know to comprehend the greatness of Hashem until we ate matzah. Once we ate matzah, we were able to understand the greatness of Hashem. I'm skipping to the last line of this paragraph, paragraph 1 on page 3. The second to last line, the last sentence, in other words, just like the physical bread nourishes our intellectual capacity on a spiritual level, which is what we described a moment ago, as mentioned above, so too, through the matzah, when we eat matzah on Pesach, what are we getting? What are we getting? What's drawn down when we eat matzah? Listen to these words, they're fascinating. Chayis, energy. The energy for what? Lada'as hanefesh elikis. Lada'as hanefesh elikis. Our nefesh elikis, the da'as. Remember that whole da'as? The ability to know Hashem, to absorb Hashem, to really experience Hashem in our personal, intimate lives in a very deep, practical way. We get that das of our nefesh elikis gets nurtured and nourished through every bite of matzah. When we eat matzah on Pesach, what's in your matzah? The energy to know Hashem, the energy to absorb Hashem, to be intimate with Hashem, to feel Hashem, to experience his goodness, his embrace, his actual literal presence in your life. That comes through matzah. Just like physically we get that energy from food, spiritually we get energy from the matzah. Now the Baal HaTanya is going to explain, why does Hashem choose to give us this energy through the matzah? How does the physical matzah represent everything we need to know Hashem? What is the greatness? What's the awesomeness of matzah that makes it so precious, that makes it the perfect vehicle to transmit? It's the perfect capsule to deliver the vitamin that we need to know Hashem. What is it about it? And he says that matzah represents humility or bittul, where chametz represents hagba v'hisnasos. I'm going to read it. I'm going to read it inside. Paragraph 2, the first line on page 3. Va'inyan ki chametz hu bechinas hagba v'hisnasos, because chametz is the idea of elevating, grandeur, like up, creating yourself as if you're something, someone of yourself. As if I am the one on my own here to elevate myself. Matzah is there's no elevation there. Matzah is very clear. I am nothing and nobody but for Hashem's animation of me. I am nothing and nobody but for Hashem's light within me, which is everything. So too in Avodas Hashem. Now the Baal HaTanya says something so fascinating. I underlined it twice, okay? When Bnei Yisrael were in Mitraim, it is known, says the Baal HaTanya, that they were so entrenched in Mitraim, they were so enmeshed in the cultural mindset of Mitraim, and their minds and their emotions were so absorbed, were so impacted by the slavery mentality, okay, to the point that, look at those two words that are underlined with 2-9, to the point that what, and you're going to see familiar words, that caused them, the ultimate expression of slavery was what? Hagarmim liyos yesh v'nifra, to the point that it caused them to see themselves as yesh v'nifrad. They saw themselves as something separate from Hashem. Isn't that cool? How it's the same language? They were so enmeshed in the culture of Mitraim. They felt so attached to the Mitraim to the point that they felt that they were separate from Hashem. Now, how did Hashem take them out of Mitraim? Hashem took them out through showing his face, through showing his glory, showing his light, demonstrating his truth to them in a miraculous way. And when he did that, that gave them a sense of bittul, because in the light of Hashem's truth, they lost the delusion that they are something other than Hashem. In the light of Hashem's truth, they saw, whoa, Hashem is true. And I belong to Hashem because that is my truth. It's not just that Hashem is true in the world. Hashem is my truth. And in the face of Hashem's truth, they lost the ego. They lost that illusion of davar nifrad b'fnei atzmai. That's how Hashem took them out of Mitzrayim, by exposing his great light, his awesome presence. And when they saw Hashem's miraculous presence in front of them, they lost their ego and they embraced bittul, because they saw Hashem is true, and that truth is my truth. And the last line of that paragraph, which is such an important, empowering line and such a meaningful line, V'al yedei bittul, and through their absorption of bittul, through their alignment with bittul, through this sense of bittul that filled their hearts and that they held on to, that they saw, this is the truth, I am bittul. there was a story of a chassid, and I'm going to mess it up because I messed up the details and stories, but it's a great story. He was so, he lived with bittul. It was such a big, important part of his life that when someone asked him once, he was walking into a room and someone said, "Who goes there?" And he said, "Bittul goes there." This is who I am. He was so absorbed with the idea of bittul. So when Bnei Yisrael, Baal Yadei bittul, what did the bittul cause? The bittul caused, this is an unbelievable thing, Baal Yadei bittul v'yera ila azu. Through this bittul and this sense of awe of Hashem, yatzu mikol hamitzarim v'gvulim, v'chein yitzias Mitraim begashmias. It didn't happen first. Not that they went out of Mitzrayim and then they had a sense of bittul. Hashem revealed himself. They had a sense of bittul that drove away their ego and allowed them to get out of their spiritual limitations. V'chein yitzias Mitzrayim begashmias, and then the physical redemption from Egypt followed. And all of this happened after Chatzos Halayla. Why were they commanded to eat matzah before them? Because in order to receive Hashem's great light, in order to experience it, to absorb it, for it to make a meaningful impact on them, they had to take an action. They had to try to create a sense of bittul. And then Hashem's exposure gave them a deeper sense of bittul, a more complete sense of bittul. But they had to do something to demonstrate, I want to know you, Hashem. I want to live by your truth. Show me the truth. So their action, their I'm going to use the word obedience, their willingness to obey Hashem in a way that did not make sense. Why should I eat matzah on this night? Why? Because Hashem said. Oh, okay. With that, doing something for no reason other than Hashem said, that opened their hearts and minds to experience Hashem's awesome light. And then Hashem revealed himself to them, which gave them that greater sense of bittul. On paragraph 3, the Baal HaTanya tells us, now we understand why the Zohar calls matzah by the word michla de mehemenusa, the bread of faith, because emunah is also the idea of bittul. Faith is bittul. What's faith? Faith begins where knowledge ends. The knowledge is like, if I don't understand it, it doesn't exist. That's ego. Faith means there is something bigger than me. I am not everything. What I understand is not all there is. That is faith in Hashem. It's recognizing that Hashem is bigger than us and aligning ourselves to that, surrendering to that awesomeness of Hashem that's bigger than ourselves. In that sense, faith is the same thing of bittul, because bittul is the awareness that I am here by Hashem, with Hashem, for Hashem. I'm bigger than myself. I'm a carrier of Hashem's light. I am nothing but Hashem's light. And faith is that same thing. Faith is bigger than what I know. Faith is beyond me. It's not about me. It's about Hashem. When we eat matzah, in paragraph 4, the Baal HaTanya tells us that literally when we eat matzah, faith is recognition and knowing Hashem. When we eat matzah, we, like the child who says, Father, Father, when we eat matzah, we have that ability to know Hashem and to recognize Hashem and to strengthen our faith in Hashem. Now, when we do matzah, remember we said there's 2 levels of matzah. One is with the vav, one is without the vav, and one is with the vav. When we eat matzah, how is it that on Pesach night we don't have the first matzah? We only have the second. The Baal HaTanya tells us something fantastic. Okay, he says, where do I see Hashem? Where's that great exposure of Hashem's light? The Baal HaTanya says this Yetzias Mitzrayim happened before Bnei Yisrael had the Torah, before the Jewish people got the Torah at Har Sinai. But now in our generation, we have Nigla alehem melech malchei hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We have Hashem revealing himself to us every single day of the year. How? Through learning Torah and doing mitzvahs. We have that. We have that awesomeness. We have that experience. And that's why when we sit down at the Seder, we already have part one. We already have part one. We already did the bittul of part one. We already did what the Baal HaTanya calls yira tata'a. We did what we could do. We did the mitzvahs. We did what Hashem wanted us to do. So now we're perfect receptacles. We're open to receiving Hashem's awesome light, and we receive it through the mitzvahs that we did the whole year, even before Chatzos. So when we sit down at the Seder, the matzah that we eat is infused with a tremendous revelation of God. It's a tremendous revelation of Hashem. It's a tremendous light of Hashem infused within that bread. And to demonstrate that, the Baal HaTanya tells us something fantastic, and I'm skipping, but I see the time and I want to leave time for discussion. So I'm going to go straight to this. And this is something that's, if you never thought about this question before, you're going to be like, wait, why didn't I think about that? And it might shatter your childhood understanding of the story of the Yetzias Mitraim. But think about this scientifically, okay? The Jewish people are going out of Mitzrayim. They have their dough in sacks on their back, or their dough in something on their back, right? Remember that picture where they're holding the dough, and the sun was so strong it baked their bread. It didn't have time to rise. Am I saying this? Is this your childhood version of the story? Yeah, it didn't have time to rise because the sun was baking it so strongly. Well, I have a question with that, because if they had a pile of dough, how did it get sliced into matzah? It didn't. They sat down at one point and they baked the matzah, right? They either baked it in Ramses or they baked it in Sukkos. There's different opinions of where they actually sat down to bake their matzah. So when they were walking, that matzah dough, that challah dough, was on their backs. Okay? The sun didn't bake the matzah. How could the sun bake the matzah? And even if it did, right? They actually sat down and baked matzah. It didn't happen while they were walking. Now we know when we bake matzah, and do any of you make sourdough bread? I've been doing, since last year, the last couple of months, or maybe it was in the summer, that I started doing sourdough bread. And you know that after a couple of hours, that dough rises. And that action starts happening within the very first few minutes. It starts getting bubbly, it starts fermenting from the very first minute that the water is mixed with the flour. So even if you want to say that the Jewish people had kvisas haderech, they went so quickly, okay? Could we really say that the bread had no time to rise? Doesn't bread rise within seconds, within minutes? Doesn't bread rise? And we know that this is the action of how bread rises. And that's why if you ever go to a matzah bakery, they are busy baking that. They're kneading that dough. They don't leave it for a second. They're busy working with the dough. Not for a second do they leave it go. Why? Because the second you let it go, it starts to rise. And that's a lesson in our service. If we're not working with ourselves, we're becoming ego. Because ego, it's gonna happen. We're gonna bloat into ego if we're not actively working on shimur, on protecting ourselves from ego, on pounding on that dough to make it into matzah, to keep it from rising. So how could it be that the matzah didn't rise at all without any working? What was the secret of that miracle? What was the secret behind the fact that the dough did not rise at all? Not even for a second, and it took more than a few seconds. Even if they went with kvisas haderech, it took more than a few seconds for Bnei Yisrael, for the Jewish people, to all travel from Egypt either to Ramses, where they gathered, or to Sukkos, the first stop. Wherever they baked the matzah, we're not sure. There's differences of opinion. But it took at least a couple of minutes, right? So how come the dough didn't rise at least a little bit? And the answer is, the Baal HaTanya tells us, let's find the answer in the text. The text tells us that the spiritual ear, the spiritual environment did not allow for even the slightest bit of ego. God's light, Hashem's presence was so prominently displayed that there was no room for ego. There was not an inch. Of course, it wasn't about the time that didn't allow it to rise, because on the time itself, we know that dough rises. Dough ferments within a matter of seconds. The action of fermenting begins. Scientifically, it's proven that dough ferments from 1 second to the next. So the secret of why this dough did not ferment, why this dough did not rise, why it had no ability to rise, is something entirely different. It's not the time. It's not because they were rushing. It's because Hashem's light was so powerfully revealed that spiritually there was no room for ego. And there was no room for ego. This truth that there's no room for ego was represented in the fact that the matzah physically did not rise. The dough physically did not rise. It could not become chametz. Let's look at those words again inside, because it's fascinating. Page 4, paragraph 2. What is the matzah base? This is the bottom line. The matzah base, the second matzah that the Jewish people eat, which is the only matzah that we eat. This is the matzah that we eat on Pesach. What is it? It came after midnight, after Karban Pesach, after Hashem revealed himself to them. What was that revelation? What was that awesome revelation? Second line, Dehine, Inin HaPesachu Mashakasaf Upasach Hashem. What was that revelation? Hashem jumped. What does it mean Hashem jumped? She'uhu inyan dilug. Hashem jumped. Hashem bypassed that whole system, that whole organized system where Hashem distills his glory and minimizes his light and contracts it so that it fits into our world. Hashem bypassed that whole system and gave us a light and exposed himself with such awesomeness. Not at all according to that order through which Hashem usually reveals himself. This awesomeness. What was this awesomeness? Gilui Shechina, the revelation of Hashem's presence. What is that revelation of Hashem's presence? Shahu Bechinas Ar Ein Sof Baruch Hu, is Hashem's infinite, unstoppable, indefinable light, which is higher than anything that could ever come close to this world. This awesome light of Hashem, Hayameir Umizgala Az Benafsham Ha'elakis, this awesome godly light was radiating within their godly soul. And by the way, ladies, this is what happens when we eat the matzah. This is what happens to us on Pesach night. There's an awesome godly energy radiating in our soul that comes through us, that we ingest literally with that matzah as we eat it. Vizehu, and now we'll read it in the text, continue reading, understanding how the words of the Haggadah reflect this concept. Vizehu ad shenigla le'ah melech malchei hamelachim. And that's why we say, until Hashem revealed himself to them. Perish, meaning malchei hamelachim. This represents Hashem's light, the essence of Hashem's light that's greater than all the four worlds. Let's skip to paragraph 3. This, by the way, paragraph 2 is describing the awesomeness of Hashem's light. Okay, and we are called, and this is what this, and there's such beautiful words here. I hate to skip it, but I don't want anybody to not listen to this because it's too long. It's just so beautiful that he again repeats this idea that we were like we are called a child. When Bnei Yisrael, when the Jewish people left Mitraim, were called a child, just like a child has this recognition of his father without understanding the biology of how this individual is related to me. I just know he's my father. I don't know. I just know I'm connected to him very deeply, very profoundly, very strongly. I feel attached. I don't know the biology, but I love him. I belong to him. So too, when we eat the matzah, it feeds that ability to know Hashem on that level that's even deeper than our ability, than our intellectual capacities. It's a very, very primitive, raw sense of knowing Hashem. And then through as we mature and we develop and we grow, we absorb that on a deeper level. But that is what faith is all about. Paragraph 3 is, what are we saying? It didn't have a chance to rise. Why didn't it have a chance to rise? Because ad shenigla alehem, because Hashem was revealing himself to them, right? Not because they didn't have enough time, because ad shenigla alehem. Because it didn't have the possibility to rise. Because of the intense revelation of Hashem's light in that moment, in that space. There was no way, not an inch, not a centimeter, not a millimeter of space, no grasp for ego. There was no space for, in the face of Hashem's revelation, there was no space. It doesn't say, and that's what we say in the Haggadah, and it says this in the Chumash, they baked the dough, and they were cakes of matzah, ki loy chametz, because it could not be chametz. It doesn't say they baked matzah and not chametz. It says it baked matzah because there was no way it could become chametz. And therefore, even though when they went from Mitraim till they came to Ramses, even though they went speedingly, as if carried on the wings of an eagle, they had kvitzas haderech. Miraculously, they got there very, very quickly. Mikol makam bitziruf ad shehatzesi eish. If you connect that limited amount of time till they made the fire, until they actually, baked those matzahs, vadai shaha habatzek. There was at least a little bit of shehiyah. Shehiyah is that fermentation process, right? That waiting time. There was vadai shaha habatzek yoiser mikdei shir chimutz. It had to have waited at least a little bit, enough to become chametz. Ve'im kol zeh loy chametz. It did not become chametz. Why? Because Hashem's light was that prominently, gloriously revealed. So where does this leave us? Where does this leave us? What is in your matzah? Today's talk was entitled, What's in your matzah? What's in your matzah is flour and water and something else. What's in your matzah is an infusion of spiritual energy that makes this food the only one of its kind. Bread is one category of food. Matzah is another. This matzah is not a bread that's flat. It's not a bread that just technically didn't rise. It's a bread of faith. It's a bread that nurtures our faith. Every day we absorb all kinds of vitamins. On Pesach, we eat a unique kind of vitamin. It's called matzah. And it looks like matzah. But what it is actually, it's a massive dose of emunah and bittul and freedom that it brings. It's an emunah vitamin. And through that emunah, we have a sense of bittul. And with that, we have healing and we have freedom. That is what's in our matzah, an infusion of Hashem's light that nurtures our faith, strengthens our awareness of his presence, which gives us an identity of bittul. Who goes there? Bittul goes there. I am bittul. I am a carrier of Hashem's light. I am designed, defined, and powered by the one and only Hashem himself. And I am nothing but that. That is who I am. There is no other. Okay, that's the infusion of Hashem's light that we absorb when we eat the matzah. It's an emunah vitamin. And from there, the Zohar tells us, this was not in this mimer, but the Zohar also tells us, and this is discussed elsewhere in the writings of the Baal HaTanya, that the Zohar also calls the matzah, is also called michla de asvasa, the bread of healing. And right, because from faith comes all healing. From bittul comes all freedom. Freedom from our attachment to our anxiety, from our attachment to our traumatic experiences, from our attachment to all that pulls us down and separates us from Hashem. Faith is the awareness that we are not people who are separate from Hashem. We're not separate entities from Hashem. We're not here by ourselves, with ourselves, for ourselves. We are carriers of Hashem's light. We are bittul. So eating matzah on Pesach fuels this sense of bittul. And with that, it fuels this sense of freedom. And from this freedom comes all the goodness and the strength to live a life of freedom, to not just to be free from Mitraim, but to be free from our own internal Mitraim, from the part of us that ties us in chains of misery, of self-pity, of helplessness, of the past, of compulsions, of weaknesses, and all that. Because the more we have awareness that we are carriers of Hashem's light, and that's what we absorb when we eat the matzah, we get that awareness. It feeds our neshama. It charges our da'as to know Hashem, to know that not just that Hashem is true, but that Hashem is my truth. I am part of Hashem. I belong to Hashem. I'm not separate. I'm not a rising gaiva, inflated somebody who's really a nobody. I am Hashem's beloved daughter. I am designed, defined, and powered by Hashem's light. And the more we realize that we are carriers of Hashem's light, the more strength and healing we can bring into our lives, into our hearts, and into the world around us. And this opens the door, literally opens the pipeline of brachas. Remember that line where the Baal HaTanya said that from the sense of bittul, they were empowered to exit their personal Mitzrayim, and from there, the chen b'yitzias Mitzrayim, the gashmias, that's how they went out, the gashmias. So too in our spiritual, emotional, psychological freedom of all that limits us, this opens the pipeline of the brachas in our lives, the pipeline through which Hashem can bring true healing, true blessing, true freedom from all our pain, from the gullus itself, from give us all our needs, and most importantly, the one need that we all, the one prayer, the one big healing for the entire broken world. The brokenness of gullus will be complete with the aleph of Hashem's revelation, with the coming of Mashiach, and the complete geula, L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim. I want to conclude with a beautiful blessing that the Lubavitcher Rebbe sent out to somebody, and somebody just sent it to me recently, and I think it's so beautiful, and it ties, it brings all of that we just learned into a beautiful blessing. The Lubavitcher Rebbe says, greetings and blessings. On the occasion of the forthcoming Yom Tov Pesach, I send you my prayerful wishes that the festival of our freedom bring you and yours true freedom. And the Rebbe is now going to describe what is true freedom. Freedom from anxiety, material and spiritual, from anything which might distract from serving Hashem wholeheartedly and with joy. and to carry over this freedom and joy into the whole year. Wishing you and yours a kosher and happy Pesach. Thank you everyone for joining, and I want to wish you a kosher and freilichen Pesach. And I would love to learn on Chol HaMoed Pesach. I would love to do part 2 of this mimer, and tap into what Kriyas Yamsuf and Shvi Shel Pesach and Seudas Mashiach is all about. I'll let you know, I guess, on closer to the time. I want to wish everybody a kosher and happy Pesach. Next week we're going to be scrubbing and rubbing and cleaning, and and I'll see you, Mirza Shem, on Chol HaMoed, hopefully.